So, Mario Kart World, eh? Game's been out for a few days now, and I've been playing a fair bit of it, and I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed overall. It's so refreshing to have a brand new Mario Kart game after over 10 years of playing Mario Kart 8. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and I do think it's a fantastic game, but we were playing it for a long time, so Mario Kart World is a very welcome change. Now, when people were speculating about a potential sequel to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, one question on everybody's minds was, how do you top that game's sheer volume of content? I mean, 96 tracks is an absolutely insane number, so it feels like no matter what they did, if they were to approach this from the angle of a traditional Mario Kart game, people would probably be disappointed and underwhelmed. I know one idea that was floated around was going for more of a Nintendo Kart rather than a Mario Kart, encompassing a variety of franchises, with characters and tracks from all of these different series, and while it does sound cool on paper, I've never been too keen on the idea. I might sound like a bit of an elitist, a bit of a purist here, but I do like Mario Kart as it is. I'd want it to stay Mario. You know what I mean? I wouldn't want the identity of the series diluted, as silly as that sounds. I was cool with the crossover characters and a couple of the crossover tracks from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but if they were to make the whole game like that, I can't say I'd be the biggest fan. However, it's pretty evident that Nintendo had their own plans for what they were going to do and what direction they were going to take the series in to set it apart from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and that was to create an entire, interconnected, explorable, open world, which I think was genius. In my eyes, this was a fantastic decision, and quite possibly the perfect direction to take the series in from here, because it's so different to what Mario Kart 8 Deluxe offered, and it gives you a completely different style of gameplay. I just think the idea has boundless potential, and some of that is realised in the game, some of it less so. We'll get into a bit more about that later, but for now, more broadly speaking, it does really feel like this game is trying to inject as much personality and as much Mario into the Mario Kart franchise as humanly possible, if that makes sense. We can see this in the art direction, for instance. While Mario Kart 8 Deluxe certainly felt like a Mario game, and it had its own style and it had its own personality, it didn't feel quite as charming as some of the older entries in the series. I mean, I'm looking at things like Double Dash specifically here, for instance. Whereas with Mario Kart World, they've picked up where Mario Wonder left off with these new character designs and embellished the whole game with so much personality. Don't get me wrong, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is an absolutely gorgeous game, especially those base game tracks, but the style and the charm of Mario Kart World puts it on another level for me. I think it does definitely feel cartoonier than 8 Deluxe, but cartoonier in a good way, like a more stylized way. It really does feel like they're rejuvenating the whole Mario series and breathing new life into it after the kind of stale era that they had from the late 2000s, or, well, more so like the early 2010s to the early 2020s, and I'm very glad that this refreshed identity isn't just limited to the mainline games, but also extends to the spin-offs as well. Along with the world just feeling more colourful and vibrant, the character designs are also just rounder, friendlier, cuter, more expressive in their animations, even when you look at the character select screen, which has gotten a fair bit of flack. Not for this reason, but for its disorganized nature. But even when you look at that, all of the characters have their own little dances when you hover over them, and I just find that so cute. It is another thing that also reminds me of Diddy Kong Racing, as minor of a thing as it may be. They do seem to be playing around with like the squash and stretch. There's a lot of different trick animations, and a lot of poses the characters can do in the photo mode as well. Speaking of the characters, wow, this game has a very interesting character roster, and that was pretty apparent from the moment they showed off that first trailer, or I guess the second trailer I should say, where we saw the inclusion of all of these random NPC enemy characters. I know some people are mixed on this. Personally, I find them hilarious, and I love the fact that they're here. I mean, the fact that we can drive as Coin Coffer, Fishbone, Sidestepper, and the Snowman from Mario 64. It's just peak comedy, and I wouldn't have it any other way. While some of them are memes, like the cow, there are some very cool additions as a result of these NPC characters being included. Characters like Hammerbro, Pianta, Cataquack, overjoyed to see. I love the Mario Sunshine representation, especially with Pianto, who's been one of my go-tos. It's one of those things that I feel like if they went down the route of Nintendo Kart, we'd never see. I mean, Fishbone is never getting into Nintendo Kart, but here he is, or here it is in Mario Kart World. I do feel like there were some missed opportunities though to add some other characters. We've seen bullies around the world, for example, that would have been cool to be able to play as. And of course, if the whole point is that you're making random NPCs and obstacles around the tracks into playable characters, wouldn't this have been the perfect opportunity to bring back Troopa after he's been absent from the series for so long? I might be a little bit biased here because Troopa was one of my mains in Double Dash, but still, he should be here. He deserves a spot. And this would have been the perfect excuse to add him back in. He's not even a costume for Koopa Troopa, which is surprising. Speaking of those costumes, they are exclusively there for the main characters, not the ones that you can get for the Kamek unlocks, but I do feel as if there was scope for some of those guys to have costumes as well. Like with Hammer Bro, for example, we could have seen Fire, Ice and Boomerang Bro. They were in Mario Kart Tour, so why not add them in here? For the Piantas, you got the different coloured Piantas, like the pink and the yellow ones. They could have had the male and the female alternates as well. There's the different types of piranha plants, like the fire piranha plant. Many different variants there. Heck, Tor was obsessed with adding gold skins for different characters, so we could have even seen Gold Fishbone. That would have been the greatest thing of all time, so I'm very disappointed that that's not in the game. But even when it does come to the main characters, some of them have significantly fewer than others. For example, DK and Pauline only have one alternate costume each, if I'm not mistaken. And that begs the question, why DK and Pauline specifically? Which has actually gotten me thinking. Because DK and Pauline are primarily Donkey Kong characters, and we've seen that what looks to be a younger version of Pauline or a descendant of Pauline is playing likely a key role in Donkey Kong Bonanza, perhaps when that game comes out, we'll see a Donkey Kong themed expansion, hopefully some type of free DLC for the game. And in that DLC, what I'm hoping for is some more outfits for these characters for one, but maybe even like a Donkey Kong themed island with Donkey Kong themed tracks on there. And of course, the return of the king, my boy Diddy Kong, because he is also conspicuously absent from Mario Kart World, and not only him, but Funky Kong too. It might be wishful thinking, but you never know. Diddy Kong has been recently redesigned, so maybe they'll wait in for the release of Bonanza to add him to the game. But even aside from Diddy Kong, I do feel as if the roster does have some pretty big omissions, because him, Funky, PT Piranha and Kamek were just brought back in Booster Course Pass DLC because they were fan favourite characters. So why have they taken them away now? In my head it doesn't make sense. Like, people wanted these characters back for so long, and they brought them back. And now they've taken them away again. I don't see the logic there. And then with Mario Kart Tour, they had some other cool characters like King Bobomb, Dixie Kong and Poochie, and they didn't make the cut either. And King Bobomb especially I find quite surprising because he's been making a fair few appearances in some of the spin-offs, like in Mario Golf Super Rush I think he was a playable character. So yeah, I am a bit baffled as to why these guys have been left out, and I'm hoping that later down the line they get added in. I do think this game will be supported for a long time. I mean, just look at Mario Kart 8, right? That's our previous Mario Kart game, and that was supported for over 10 years with new content, new DLC, new characters, so maybe Mario Kart World will be the same. I do think there's a lot of scope for them to add stuff. They could add new tracks, they could add new characters, they could add new vehicles, new costumes. There's so much they can do here, and I really hope they capitalize on the opportunity. That brings me on to what I think is the area that has the most potential for being expanded upon down the line, that being the open world itself. This is just brimming with untapped potential, but regardless of what you think of the world, I think one thing that you really have to appreciate is just how much thought went into it. It is so clever how all of the individual tracks are incorporated into the map, and despite them being completely different environments, completely different locales, you can travel between them seamlessly and it actually feels natural. It doesn't feel jarring to drive from one track and end up in another. They really nailed the feeling of a world, that interconnectedness, and making each track feel like part of a whole rather than its own kind of sectioned off, self-contained racetrack. It's like each course is like a landmark almost in this big, massive world. I guess that brings me on to the free roaming mode, and I gotta say, I love the feeling of being able to drive absolutely anywhere without Lakitu picking me up or moving me around, just being able to jump off any section of the track or drive anywhere off-road. and explore to my heart's content, that's cool. I was a little bit concerned that the world would feel a little bit barren, but that's not actually the case thanks to the addition of the P-Switch missions, which in a way feel like kind of a spiritual successor to mission mode from Mario Kart DS. As you're driving around, you'll kind of just stumble across them, and when you activate them, you have to do like a certain challenge to get yourself some stickers, and some of them are surprisingly difficult, and they really test your driving ability and act as skill checks in a way for some of the new mechanics like rail grinding and wall driving. Given that these were newly introduced in this game, it stands to reason that they'd want to make it so that you get used to using them and become accustomed to them and drive in a way that fully utilizes them rather than being stuck in the past and just driving like you would in any other previous Mario Kart. I was a little bit worried that I'd run out of these P-Switch missions at some point and get bored of just driving around the world, but apparently there's like 400 of them and I've only done something like 30, so yeah, I probably won't be running out of those anytime soon. You've also got the Peach coins and the question mark panels to find all around the world, and both of those in combination with the P-Switch missions encourage you to explore every little nook and cranny, looking for secrets, and it gives the world and the free roaming more of a purpose than it would have otherwise had. Yeah, overall I am a pretty big fan of the open world, but part of me feels like there is some untapped potential there. In my head you can just do so much with a world like this, and I know something that a lot of people, myself included, wanted and were possibly hoping for in this game was some type of a story mode or an adventure mode, akin to what Diddy Kong Racing had almost. Having a single player campaign like that in a Mario Kart game would have been amazing, and I think they had the resources to do it here. They had the canvas, they just had to paint the picture. The way it worked in Diddy Kong Racing was that you had a hub world connecting the different tracks together. The tracks were grouped together based on the environments that they took place in, and if you beat all the tracks from one environment, you'd be able to fight that area's boss. So it was a pretty simple campaign when you think about it, but it just added a lot to the single player experience, and I think with a world as massive in scope as Mario Kart Worlds, they definitely could have done something like that. Even if there wasn't like a fully fledged story mode, I would have liked to have seen some type of boss battles or something, like in Mario Kart DS with mission mode. They did actually have some of the bosses which were reused from Mario 64 DS, like the Big Bully and I-Rock and Chief Chili. They were a lot of fun to battle against, and I think around the world there's definitely some areas that could have been used as arenas for boss fights, and with all of the different items in this game, there's a lot of different ways that they could approach how you take them down. Regardless, I do find the open world to just be a really good time just to mess around in and have fun with friends. There's a nice road trip vibe to it, and that's only accentuated by another one of my favourite parts of this game, that being the music. In the little sections between the tracks and the free roam mode, as you're driving around, you will hear remixes of a bunch of different tracks from across the whole Mario series, not just Mario Kart. There's such an awesome variety, so many familiar tunes that you'll be hearing from games like Mario 64, Sunshine, Galaxy. Like I noticed there was a Jolly Roger Bay remix, there was one of Delfino Plaza, Gusty Garden Galaxy, the Mario 64 credits theme, the Wooded Kingdom. There was even like an EDM remix of Baby Park that played at one point, even though Baby Park is not in the game, but that was very funny to hear. I like it a lot. It feels like each track that you hear triggers like a different feeling of nostalgia as you remember the times you spent playing those games. It creates kind of a feeling that you're listening to a radio or a jukebox, which again enhances the whole road trip feel of the game. Now, while the open world is certainly the most striking thing about this game, you can't talk about a new Mario Kart game without also addressing its track selection. And overall, I gotta say, I think they did a really solid job here. With the new tracks, in my head, they're all phenomenal, but it's that kind of early phase in the game where I'm still struggling to remember which track is which. I do remember that the new Bowser's Castle is so awesome aesthetically, like being able to fly through that massive tube of lava is such a cool visual. You got Acorn Heights, which is a lot of fun as well and seems to incorporate the rails and the wall driving quite thoroughly. Cheap Cheap Falls I remember being blown away by, and Boo Cinema as well is another one that springs to mind, where you go into the roll of film and it gives you like a film grain effect over your screen. And on top of the new tracks, you also have the retro tracks, which now, rather than having their own separate set of cups, are now mixed in with the new tracks, which, hey, I quite like. I think they picked a really good selection here, I'll be honest. The track that I most wanted to see back that was absent in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was Airship Fortress, and they understood the assignment. I know most people's favourite from Mario Kart DS was Waluigi Pinball, but for me it was always Airship Fortress, so I'm very happy to be racing on it again. Toad's Factory is finally making a comeback, and to be honest, this was the biggest shoo-in in my head for this game. If they did not include Toad's Factory in Mario Kart World, they would be crazy. It was a banger track from Mario Kart Wii, and all this time they hadn't brought it back. Not in Mario Kart 7, not in Mario Kart 8, not in Mario Kart Tour, not in the Booster Course Pass. But now it's back. Even though, like, there are tracks in Mario Kart Wii I prefer to Toad's Factory, this one really earned its place in this lineup. Then you've got N64 Wario Stadium, which is finally getting its chance to shine after being the only Nintendo 64 track to not have had a remake. Granted, it was not a particularly great track in Mario Kart 64, it just felt very excessively long and just dragged on and on and on, and was pretty monotonous and not very interesting, but I do think they've done a great job with the remake. The interesting thing about these remakes is that it's a mixture of complete overhauls and faithful recreations. While you've got things like Airship Fortress and Toad's Factory, which are very similar in layouts to their original counterparts with the addition of things like rail grinding and wall riding, on the other hand you've got tracks like Wario Stadium, which, while you can still tell is N64 Wario Stadium, is much more condensed in layout and overall just a far more exciting track to drive on than the original, thanks to how huge the ramps feel now and the new atmosphere that the track has. It's very cool. Another example of that is Sky High Sunday, which has to be one of the most improved tracks from its original incarnation, because in Mario Kart 8 that track always felt a bit half-baked, it always felt a bit janky, it didn't look amazing, but here it actually looks like a finished, fully fledged track, and it incorporates the stuff like rail grinding and wall driving to make it a lot more interesting to drive on. The biggest example of like an overhauled track in my head is Peach Beach, because they mixed that one up a lot. The first lap is familiar, but then after that things change completely as you drive through this new town that they created for this track and glide along it. I always found the original Peach Beach to be like a nice track, but quite a vanilla one that wasn't too interesting, so I do really appreciate the direction that they've taken it in for this remake. Then you've got things like Choco Mountain, which admittedly I was surprised to see back again after it just made a comeback in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe in the Booster Course Pass. The BCP version was admittedly like a very faithful remake, which I did enjoy, but it looks like in Mario Kart World they wanted to do something completely different with it rather than doing another true to the original remake. So now it feels quite a bit more industrialized than the OG Choco Mountain and almost feels like a completely different track. I guess you could say the same to a lesser extent about Dino Jungle, which now feels almost like a research facility rather than an ancient, uninhabited area. Out of all these retro tracks, I mean, there's only like a couple of head scratchers. I'm not quite sure why we needed to see Moo Meadows again this soon, and I guess you could also make the argument for the SNES Mario Circuit track. But even that has its own cool gimmick of it combining Mario Circuit 1, 2 and 3 together into one track, which I think was a pretty neat idea. I do think it's a shame that there aren't any Super Circuit tracks in this game, but who knows, maybe there's scope for them to be added later down the line. There is a day-night cycle now, so that's a good excuse to add back in Sunset Wilds after they completely butchered it in Mario Kart 8. That track deserves justice after how dirty it was done in the Boost Course Pass, so I would love to see it come back alongside some of the others from the GBA. I think it would be criminal of me to talk about this game's tracks and not mention the masterpiece that is Mario Kart World's Rainbow Road, because man, this is a beautiful course. You unlock it by clearing all of the previous Grand Prix, which then allows you to race on the Special Cup, and the final track, of course, is Rainbow Road. In my head, there's two main things that make a Rainbow Road track Rainbow Road. The first of which being atmosphere, and the second of which being difficulty. And I think this track scores full marks for its atmosphere. What they were going for here, I feel, was a celebration of the history of Rainbow Road through the Mario Kart series, and I think they absolutely nailed that vibe. The track is split into 5 different sections, and each one feels like it represents a different era of the Rainbow Roads. You've got the more traditional style in the first couple of sections. You've got Mario Kart 7's more space, planetary exploration feel, where you go onto the icy, watery planet, and then towards the end you've got a little bit of that space station vibe from Mario Kart 8, and it ends off with one final kind of more traditional section at the end. It just feels like such a cinematic course to drive on, so gorgeous aesthetically, and it feels like you're going on a proper journey as you go through each section. The only slight gripe that I do have is that it is a little lacking from a difficulty point of view. I feel like it's quite hard to fall off this track, or at least, you know, it's a lot easier to fall off the Rainbow Roads in Mario Kart Double Dash or Mario Kart Wii, but despite that, it's still so good, and hey, who knows, maybe down the line if they add a 200cc speed to this game, maybe that will change, maybe this track will feel a lot more difficult. I do feel like Mario Kart World as a whole is meant to be a celebration of the whole of the Mario Kart series. I mean, you can see that with the little references to the original Super Mario Kart that are scattered throughout the whole world, like the old SNES tracks and the stickers of the pixel art of the characters, the fact that there's music from all the different games in this one, and Rainbow Road is just the cherry on top of that cake. Of course, the main way through which you race through all of these tracks is the game's Grand Prix mode, which is actually one of the more controversial things about Mario Kart World. One of the things that stirred up quite a bit of debate. You get some people saying that they don't particularly like the new style of Grand Prix, in which you actually drive between the tracks. The way it works is that you do 3 laps of the first track, then you have an intermission section, and then you do 1 lap of the next track. Lots of people just look at the minimaps and say that, oh, you're just driving in a straight line, that's not very interesting, but I find that that's not really the case. Despite the maps looking like straight lines, I do find these sections to be very fun and very chaotic, thanks to the fact that there's so many hazards there, and there's a lot of oncoming traffic to dodge, and you usually end up with a lot of races condensed together. Of course, this game also has 24 races in each race, so naturally you're going to be properly packed together. With how hectic it is and how close in proximity everybody is to each other, I actually find it quite interesting, and it gives more weight to stats like top speed, to items like golden mushrooms, and I find myself slipstreaming a lot more than I used to in the previous games. While I do agree with the point that it does feel like you're not spending enough time on each track, I still find the intermissions in between the courses to be very fun to drive, and to be honest, I'm not sure whether I prefer it or the traditional style of Grand Prix, but while Grand Prix mode may be the main way of playing through this game's tracks, the highlight for me has actually been Knockout Tour. I really love this mode. While I have cleared all the Grand Prix, I haven't actually done a ton of the Rally Cups offline, but I've done quite a few Knockout Tour races online, and I find that it offers quite a different style of gameplay to normal races. It's an entirely different, more competitive vibe, because you're always fighting to stay in the game and make it to the next checkpoint. You can't just hang at the back of the pack and catch up right at the end. You always have to ensure that you make the cut. It makes for a very unexpectedly strategic game, where you always have to think about where you are, how far you are from the checkpoint, what position you're currently in, and how you can ensure that you're in a high enough position to make it to the checkpoint. So for example, where you'd normally save, say, your golden mushrooms or your mushrooms for later, in Knockout Tour you might want to use them there and then to ensure that you make it over the line. There is also of course an element of luck to it, like with the rest of Mario Kart, so sometimes you'll get really lucky with your items and you'll be able to make up a ton of positions. Sometimes you'll get screwed over at the last minute right before the cutoff. I really enjoy the kind of battle royale vibe it has going on, and how you gradually have the numbers slimming down as the race progresses. So right at the beginning it's so chaotic with all 24 people, and then when you get to the final checkpoint and it's just the 4 of you, it feels a lot more intense and you're relying a lot more on perfecting your lines at that point rather than getting lucky with items. I think the fact that you're constantly fighting to stay in it, and the fact that there is that element of elimination, that danger to it, makes it really satisfying to win. It's something I've only experienced once online, but it felt great. Better than winning a normal race. Yeah, I can't say that I was really expecting much out of Knockout Tour, but I was very, very pleasantly surprised. The only criticism I do have, and this is more to do with the online than Knockout Tour itself, is that it is difficult to get into a room for this mode with friends. Me and a couple of pals were trying to join a lobby together earlier, and we just couldn't get it working because the room just filled up way too quickly. If they added a way to party up beforehand and then open the room up to random people, then that would be a pretty big improvement. Since we talked a bit about the different modes and the different ways the game can be played, let's just take a minute to discuss how it actually feels to drive. Initially, when I did get my hands on this game, I did think it felt kind of similar to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Not quite the same, obviously, but it did feel like it used Mario Kart 8 as a base for its physics. But the more I play this game, the more I see the differences between this and Mario Kart 8, and the more I can appreciate how polished and solid this game's physics are, and how many movement options that this game gives the player. Mario Kart World is a technical game, and I can really see it appealing to the more competitive side of the fan base, with all of the new movement options like rail grinding, wall driving, tricking off the floor with those little jumps. There are so many ways you can approach driving through a track, and all of the new tracks are designed with that in mind. They all have rails incorporated into their layouts, they all have so many walls that you can drive on, and the more that you look at these tracks, the more that you start to notice these things. Right now, I'd say that I'm still relatively stuck in my ways, and I'm still playing this game like it's Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but I have been starting to play with these new mechanics a bit more, and it feels like there's a lot of potential for shortcuts here, a lot of potential for really fun, creative gameplay, and it seems like there's lots of different routes that you can take on each track, lots of different ways you can save time and optimize your line, and yeah, I look forward to seeing how like the more skilled, more technical players utilize these new mechanics to save time on the tracks, and I've already seen some pretty crazy clips. Let's just say that. I've tried to replicate a couple of them myself, didn't go so well. Another thing I kind of dig about the way that this game plays is how snappy it is. The main thing that contributes to this feeling for me is the fact that getting hit by stuff, it doesn't feel like as much of a setback as it used to. Whereas before, say in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, if you bumped into a car, got hit by a bullet bill or something, it felt like you were just done, you were cooked. Like you were dropping about 10 places and your entire momentum would just screech to a halt. Now it feels like when you collide with something, it's only really a minor setback. You fall forward in a way and you maintain some of your momentum. For instance, if you get clipped by a bullet bill from the side, your character only ends up kind of leaning a little bit to the side rather than getting fully blown out of the way. Even getting hit by lightning as well doesn't last nearly as long as it used to, and all of this contributes to making the game feel less punishing, and I think that's certainly a good thing. The mechanics in the driving is one way that this game is quite different from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and another way it's different is with the karts. Here, vehicles are no longer customizable, so rather than selecting a car, a set of wheels and a glider, now you just select a car. Personally, I'm quite a big fan of this change. I think the kart customization was a cool idea on paper, but after a while the novelty kind of wore off because the vehicles that you'd create, they never looked great, and the parts always were a bit mismatched, and once you had one combo, you'd usually just select that and forget about everything else, forget about all the other parts in the game. But now that all the cars are pre-built with their own stats, they all look nice because they're all made to look nice, and I feel like it makes it easier just to go between different ones and play around with different karts that you like. For newer players as well, I'd imagine that all of the choices in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe were a bit overwhelming, so I feel like it makes it a bit more accessible for them to be able to just pick up a car and go. And I also do like the fact that there's a lot of familiar ones from across the series, like the pipe frame from Mario Kart 64, we've got the Bee Dasher from Mario Kart DS, the Dolphin Dasher from Mario Kart Wii, the Lakitu cloud looking one from Mario Kart 7, there's even one themed after Rob, which I thought was really neat, and a pretty cool callback to Rob's appearance in Mario Kart DS. With all that in mind, overall, I am a pretty big fan of Mario Kart World. I've probably got about 15-20 hours into it so far, and yeah, between the Grand Prix, the knockout tours, the online, and free roaming around the world, I've grown to like this game a lot, and I'd imagine that as I play it more and more, I'll continue to appreciate it. There is a lot of content here, but I feel like there's potential for more. So it will be interesting to see whether that potential will be realized capitalized or not, whether Nintendo will capitalize on the scaffolding that they've effectively built here for DLC, for free updates. Things that will take this game from the already great place that it's in to GOAT status. So yeah, those are my 2 cents on the game. I like it a lot, but there are some areas for improvement. So thank you guys so much for listening to me ramble about Mario Kart World. I hope you've enjoyed hearing my thoughts, hearing my opinions on this game. If you have had an opportunity to play Mario Kart World, be sure to let me know what you think of it so far, what you like about the game, what you think could be improved, and hopefully I will see you guys around.